Hello, fourth grade! Today I'm going to be teaching you how to make matzah bread, which is an unleavened bread that was had and eaten at the Passover meal, which was celebrated on Holy Thursday evening with Jesus and his disciples. So I have all of the ingredients laid out here. First, I have 1 cup of flour that I'm going to add to my bowl. And then I'm going to add 1/3 cup of water. Now the challenge is to make this in under 15 minutes. So we're going to see how I do. So once you add those together, you kind of mix it around until it forms a nice ball of dough. It gets kind of hard to mix, but it'll form. Keep mixing it. Let's see here. Just gotta kind of keep mixing it around. Alright. And I use a fork to mix this because it helps to get the dough all mixed in together with the water. Okay, so once I've mixed it around enough, I'm going to pull it out of the bowl. I have this nice ball here that I'm going to kind of knead a little bit. So when you knead it, you put a lot of pressure into it with this part of your hand. So knead it, get some of that flour mixed in there a little bit more. And then this is going to make 8 pieces of matzah bread. And it takes only 4 minutes to make in the oven, which is a very short amount of time. I have the oven set at 475. I want to make sure it's nice and hot, and I have the pan already in there so it gets nice and warm while I'm making the bread. All right, so this dough seems pretty good. Nicely mixed together. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to break this up into 8 pieces. So let me just roll it out a little bit so that I can cut it into 8 pieces. Okay. I'll cut some of these in half. It's supposed to be a very thin bread. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pieces. All right. And now I just want to pat them down so they kind of look like pancakes. And I can pat them down, smush them down with your hand if you want. You can also use a rolling pin if you want to. You want to make it nice and thin. You can make it into a circular shape or a square shape. It doesn't really matter. So I'm going to flatten them down all like this, all right? So it'll look a little bit like that. I'm just going to keep flattening these. All right. And you'll also notice that I have here some olive oil and some salt, because that's going to add just a little bit of flavor that we get to add to our bread. It's not supposed to be a super flavorful bread. All right. I'm going to add that olive oil and salt on there when we take them out of the oven, and then they'll kind of set. Some pieces might be smaller than other pieces, but that's okay. All right. And our next step after we get all of these pieces done, flattening them, is we are going to stab them with a fork 25 times. So we put holes in them so that you can make sure it's only cooking for 4 minutes, right? So you want to make sure that it actually cooks through. So by stabbing holes into the bread, it helps it to get the heat in there. Make sure it's cooked through. All right, we're doing pretty good on time, I think. We're only 5 minutes in. Looking good. This one's going to be a little bit bigger, but that's okay. And this is a nice bread to make because it's only those two ingredients really, flour and water, the basic ingredients for bread. Normally you might use yeast for bread, but that helps it to become bigger, right? It helps the bread to rise into the loaves that we know bread to be in. But because we have to make it unleavened, it's going to be flatter without the yeast. All right, I'm on my last one here. Flatten it out. All right. And now what I have to do is I have to take each of my little pancakes, almost is what they look like, and I'm going to poke them 25 times with a fork. I'm going to take my fork, poke it 25 times. 24, 25. Then you flip it over and do it again on the other side. 6, 7, 8, 17, 18, 19, 25. All right, so this piece is done. I'll just set that to the side. Do the rest of them. Next piece. Okay. Right. This part's the fun part. I like doing this part. Right. Almost done, just 4 more here. And remember that pan is in the oven heating up, so when I put these on there, they'll already start to bake. Okay, here's the bigger one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You want to make sure as you're poking it, you don't just poke it in one spot, right? You want to get it spread out across the bread. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, and the last one. All right, so I'm going to pull my tray out of the oven. It's already been heating up. I'm going to put all of these on top. And now these are going to go in for 2 minutes in the oven. So I'll set a timer. And during those 2 minutes, I'm going to have my dad come and talk to you a little bit about unleavened bread.
So hello, 4th grade. So I'm Grandpa Hyrcza. You can call me Grandpa Hyrcza. Okay. So if you remember from the Bible, the Israelites, also known as the Jewish people, they were slaves in Egypt. The Egyptians had made them slaves, and they prayed very hard to God. They said, God, please help us not be slaves anymore. Please release us. Please help us. So what happened is God sent these plagues, as you learned earlier, and the king of Egypt, known as the Pharaoh, he wouldn't listen. No matter what they did, no matter all these different terrible things happened to Egypt. They had locusts come, and they had red blood in the river and all this. And no, the Pharaoh would not listen. The king of Egypt, he wouldn't let the Israelites go. So God said, well, I've tried to make him listen to me, but he doesn't believe in me. So I'm going to have to do something more drastic. So he sent the angel of death to kill every firstborn among beasts and people. Well, because of that, what happened was is God said, I need to prepare my firstborn people, the Israelites, the Jews, for this great event that's going to happen, this terrible event. So what he did was is he said, you're going to eat unleavened bread for 7 days. 7 days. And why? Why do they have to eat unleavened bread? Well, because it was like praying. They had to do a little sacrifice, and unleavened bread doesn't taste very good. So instead of letting them make good regular bread with yeast, he said, "You make it unleavened." Okay, so what happened was they made the bread unleavened, and that was a way for them to pray. They pray, God, please let us go. Let us be released from the Egyptians. So they ate the unleavened bread for 7 days.
Wow. All right. So I'm going to pull those out of the oven and I'm going to flip them over. And then my dad's going to share with you a little bit more information about this special feast that we're celebrating today. Okay. Let me flip these over. Use the spatula. All right. And you can already see they're baking because they don't have a lot to bake in it, right? It's just water and flour. So I flip them all over. And I'm going to put them right back in for 2 minutes.
So then, as you know, from then on, the Israelites, the Jewish people, would celebrate the feast of Passover every year to remember that God released them from the Egyptians. He gave them freedom because he sent the angel of death. And the Pharaoh finally said, your God is very powerful. I need to let you go. So they got to go to the promised land. Now, fast forward 2,000 years. Jesus comes to earth, and he's a good Jewish man. And his mother Mary and Joseph taught him to celebrate the Passover every year. So he did, as a good Jewish follower. Every year he celebrated Passover, and part of that was the unleavened bread. So when the Last Supper, when he was right before he was going to die to save us all from our sins, he celebrated the Passover with his 12 disciples. And it was unleavened bread, but then he made a huge transformation, right? He knew he was going to die, and he knew he was going to return to the Father, and he wouldn't be with his best friends anymore, but he wanted to stay with them somehow. So during the Passover meal, he took that unleavened bread, and he said, "This is my body." And it became his body. Now, it looked the same, and it tasted the same, but underneath it all, it became him. And how can that be? Well, because he's God, he can do anything, right? He changed water into wine. He raised people from the dead. So he can change a piece of lowly bread into himself because he wanted to stay with us. And he knew he had to go back to the Father. So that was his way of staying with us because he loves us so much. He wanted to stay with us all the time. So now, all the way up until the present time, we can go to any Catholic church and go in, and with that little candles lit, we know that Jesus is there in the unleavened bread.
Thanks, Dad. All right, now I'm going to pull it out for the second time. And that's all that it has to do for the baking. So you can, if I feel it, it looks just slightly browned, and it definitely feels harder because it's been baked through. So the last step for making this bread is to take the bread, and then I'm going to put some olive oil on top of it, just a little bit, coat it with a little bit of olive oil, and then add a little bit of salt as well, just to the top, just a little bit. And then you can flip it over and do it on the other side too. So fourth grade, I hope you enjoyed this lesson. And I hope you enjoyed seeing Grandpa Hyrcza join us for our showing today. If you get to make some matzah bread, it's really quick, as you can see, about 15 minutes. If you make it, I would love to see pictures, so send them along if you can. Have a wonderful Holy Thursday, fourth grade.